All right, welcome back to another episode of Clarity Digital Podcast. Today I have as my guest a friend, mentor, really an awesome person, Mr. Rick Ragusa. I have had the pleasure of working with him in the past on several projects, and he knows his stuff, so that's why I asked him to be here. But I'd like to welcome him and ask him to introduce himself. Rick, welcome. I appreciate your time. I know you're busy, so really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, my pleasure, Al. Great to be with you today. Al and I have known each other for quite some time. Goes back to, I guess, California Closet Stage, right? When I was doing digital there. And then most recently at Pendleton, doing a lot of SEO work. So, my background has been primarily on the brand side over the years, going way back. I'm going to date myself when there was no internet and we were doing catalog marketing at Williams-Sonoma. Catapult through the years, and I've mostly been on the e-com side, on the brand side, and managing that channel of business for a number of multi-channel or omni-channel marketers, retailers, primarily in the home furnishings category, but not exclusively. And fortunately, I've been able to work with really some wonderful brands that so many people know and love. So, and great teams at all those places. So it's been a fun career. And then most recently, I don't know what I was thinking, I made a big pivot kind of late in my career and jumped back over to the technology side. And I'm working now doing business development for a company called DataRamp, where we specialize in some really unique database technology that we think is well suited for what's happening out in the market right now and where people are going with data and data management and data governance and certainly getting into AI, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of my background. And again, great to be with you here today, Al, for sure.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Amazing, because you and I have somewhat a similar background. I did get into marketing right around the .com days, so I never had to do the catalog stuff. And when I first started, I was in the engineering side. I was coding websites, and I was a junior DBA / website developer, wrote a lot of store procedures in SQL, worked with and then I helped our database administrator with, data scrubbing and a bunch of other things. So I remember those days, and it's crazy that after all these years, we're kind of going back to that again. We're talking about data again.
I know, but it's so true, because we really kind of come back to, I think, even with everything that's happening in the market right now, so much of what is important are the basics. And, countless times now in different conversations we've had with people around data and the old adage, garbage in, garbage out. And I think that as we look at what's happening with AI and the use of AI certainly in marketing and commerce, it heightens the need for really quality data and good data governance, because there's so much that's happening within AI itself. So it's the same stuff. Data's important, but now it's just sort of on steroids in terms of being important, without a doubt. Without a doubt.
You don't have to write store procedures or do SQL statements anymore. You can just go to ChatGPT, right, and just talk to it. I mean, that's really the difference, because whatever ChatGPT gives you, we used to be able to get it through like SQL, right? But you had to write all these complicated SQL and statements and store procedure. Now it's just plain English, which is thanks to generative AI. But I'm glad that you brought it up, because we're increasingly data oriented. Everything is data from the self-driving cars and to the and since we're going to rely on it so much, it's so important that we are relying on clean data, accurate data. The whole issue of data readiness and governance comes. So let's talk about that. What is data readiness and data governance?
Yeah. So at least when I think about data readiness, and we talk about data readiness, it's, have you gone through the process to ensure that the data you're ultimately porting into, really whether it's AI or not, is your data ready for the task ahead, right? So if we're thinking about analytics, have we structured our data? Have we created what you'll hear is the contextual data layer, right? So it's kind of the gold data, if you will. Is that properly prepared in order to enable, whether we're driving campaign development or we're doing analytics, et cetera? Any and all of that is dependent on that layer. So have we done all of the work we should do to prepare the data to inform that contextual data layer? that will then be used to drive experience, ultimately. And so where a lot of people are really focused on is in whether you're running old legacy systems or you're running new environments. There are so many touch points and channels right now of where that consumer data, and I'm going to mostly focus around the idea of consumer data, right? So when we think about consumer data and the touch points that any kind of omni-channel retailer would have, lots of different touch points, not only just from a commerce standpoint, but certainly from the media standpoint, right? Because we may still potentially be in the mail with the catalog, right? We're doing social, we've got SEO going, we've got any number of strategies that you're implementing. Yeah. Email, et cetera. So texting, right? We've got any number of channels that we're operating. And the data that's coming back through those channels may not be consistent, right? So how do I ensure that when Rick Ragusa is coming and engaging with my brand wherever, in my store, online, through my social page, et cetera, how do I ensure that I am collecting all of that information and that I know it's all attached to Rick Ragusa? So when we think about data readiness, it's specifically around the consumer aspect. It's have we effectively stitched together everything that we know about Rick Ragusa. And not only is it just let's call it the first party data that we glean from Rick, right? Because we're directly engaged with him in these various channels. But what if we want to do some enrichment on Rick? So we know everything about him in terms of what we know in terms of how he's buying with us. But what else do we want to know about Rick, and how do we maybe want to enrich that data record in order to, again, improve the experience on how we may be engaging with that consumer? So now you've got this need to not only work with your first-party data, but maybe you're doing third-party data overlays and enrichment. Again, with the expectation to improve the experience, improve the campaigning and touch points, et cetera. So the readiness is then doing that work to prepare a record, or in some cases, millions of records, with all of the best information you can have on that particular consumer and the fact that it's accurate, right?
Yeah.
Have we stitched together? And so those are really important things for getting ready in terms of AI data readiness. I would then add to that, the really critical piece of it is, what are you actually going to put into an AI model, right? And I would say probably one of the most important things is we are not going to feed PII into an AI model, right? We need to be able to anonymize that consumer record, if you will, whether it's individual or household. We need to be using anonymized data as we port that into an AI model. And so that then, of course, is the other piece of AI data readiness. And we see that across the board, using ID graphs and so forth, and unique IDs in order to anonymize that data, still be able to run the analytics and run the campaigning, and really only tap into a PII or other identifiable information at the point that we're now going to go and execute a campaign, because we need an email, we need a physical address, whatever it might be. But all that other work in terms of analyzing, developing campaign and so forth, if we're using an AI model to do a lot of that work, we want to be really restrictive around what we ultimately put in to the model, certainly from a risk and a security standpoint. So
yeah, it's a lot of good info there. Even there's a couple of things that I learned there. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
And it's people need to understand that when you go in ChatGPT and you just prompt something, you're not really asking one big brain. All this data readiness and governance and data hygiene, we used to call it, right? In the DBA
exactly.
world, that's already been done in multiple times. There's a lot of work has gone into it, and basically the ChatGPT is really the front end and basically an AI generative model that accesses that data and gives you what you want to know. Hence, there's chances of hallucinations and mistakes. Even when you go ChatGPT or Gemini, they tell you that AI can make mistakes. That they're just oversimplifying it. Basically, that really means that we're going by the data we have, and that data is good as we have it, and that's what you're going to get, right?
Yep. And you're probably up against it too with your agency in terms of SEO and agentic commerce now.
Yeah.
That whole world in terms of the data that you're pulling now relative to, agentic commerce, that's changing how you're doing, your work in terms of SEO. And so again, the kinds of data we're using are also changing,
Right.
So it's just being thoughtful about, have you cleaned your data?
Yeah.
Let's just talk about address, standardization and so forth. All of the cleanliness, ensuring and validating that it is in fact an email address, right? All that basic stuff that tends to kind of get left out of the conversation because it's just table stakes. Everyone should be having that conversation. Have we dealt with just the basics to start this process? Because that's foundational, right? If you think about the medallion architecture, right? There's that bronze level that's just, it's the raw data, right? And then we're going to do things with that data and clean it and so forth to get it to the sort of gold level, the gold standard, the golden record, to ultimately then really kind of go do the rest of the work that we do in terms of analytics, campaign development, targeting, et cetera, et cetera. But it does all kind of come back to that. Have we done everything that we need to do? So the basics still apply, but now it's also then being very thoughtful about at the point that we're going to push it into an AI model, are we being restrictive around what we do and we don't want to put in to the model in order for us to gain the most that we can out of the output, if you will.
Yeah,
So,
it makes perfect sense. And, I think that my question comes after that. How do we clean up this data? It's obviously we're talking about big data. We're talking about lots of data. What are some methods or tools out there? Is that something that a company you're working for right now does?
Yeah. Thank you for setting that sales
Of course,
pitch up
yeah.
for me. That sounds
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, sure. So I got to
Well,
get into in case SEO doesn't work out.
That's right. Well, really, I think not only what we're doing at DataRamp, but I think this just sort of industry in general, what we're seeing is, the trend has been when we think about how we're going to leverage data for, let's say, for campaigning and analytics and so forth, that, the CDP world has really been changing in that the push has been, let's bring that capability to the data. So whatever the capability may be, if it's CDP capability, how do we bring that closer to the data itself? I would say the same thing with overall data management and hygiene and so forth. How can I bring the technology that I need to do what I'm doing in terms of hygiene and preparation? How do I bring that to my data instead of sending my data out of house in order for it to be processed? So DataRamp, that's the model that we effectively have taken in designing our capability, is that we bring our hygiene capability to the data in the cloud behind the client's firewall in their compute. So the whole process of address standardization, CAS and NCOA, ID assignment, which is a critical piece, right? Mm-hmm. All of these things that you're doing to get your data in the best possible state it can be, traditionally a lot of that has been done by sending data out of house. Now, regulated industry has been very strict about that for many years, right? So for privacy reasons and for security reasons, they have basically mandated that they will never send PII out of house. Well, I think we've definitely seen the swing now to that same stringent requirement around how we're going to manage our data and where we're going to allow our data to be sent or not be sent is now being adopted across all categories. It's not just regulated industry. And so it's becoming more critical that all of that work can get done, but I want to be able to keep it in my cloud. I don't want to have to send my data out of house. Yeah. So that's what we focus on is bringing the technology, if you will, to where the data is. Same thing when because of what we do in terms of that data cleansing and the ID assignment, it also allows us to bring together two or more parties in exchanging data. And through our proprietary ID assignment, we can actually allow those parties to share data, again, behind the firewall in the client's compute without PII ever having to be shared back and forth. So again, being able to not only cleanse and improve your data, be able to go through data hydration, and being able to do that in your cloud behind your firewall is becoming more critical for really almost any category. I think it's interesting if we're really anxious to see where Databricks comes with their new customer lake, which is, it's an amazing database platform. And now they've brought Customer Lake into view where they're essentially bringing that CDP capability, but they're bringing it right to the data in a Databricks environment. You'll still need the ability to obviously execute in email and text, et cetera, but we think pretty brilliant that what they've done with Customer Lake really changes the whole dynamic. But again, it's bringing the technology to the data, right?
Yeah.
The most we can do to keep the data in our world is critical as we move forward, for sure.
Got it. that all make sense. So basically a lot of left and inner join statements, right?
Say that again?
A lot of left and inner join statements. I remember the good old days of SQL. So I have a follow-up question on that, but basically around marketing, and you have a lot of background in marketing.
Yeah.
So we are talking about personalization, and that's one thing that AI does really well, but it also feels a little bit scary. I can't think of the right word right now when I get this super personalized email from someone I don't know. And I got it this morning. Congratulations on this. Something that I posted on LinkedIn a week ago, and Clarity Digital AI is a side AI consulting business, and I did, and I announced it on LinkedIn, and somebody emailed me congratulations for this and this and this, and they were just pitching me a bunch of stuff, and that backfired to me because that just seemed, it was supposed to be personalized, but it wasn't. Someone like me who just said, hey, I'm launching an AI consulting business, I'm savvy enough to know that's AI. Like me got turned off. I'm like, wow, this wasn't a good way to use AI. And I see that happening across, and from blog posts to ad copies to videos and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
As a marketer, and now as a data expert, where do you see the line? When is it too much or too little when it comes to personalization?
That's a great question.
It's an opinion. I don't think no one knows the exact answer, right? But from your perspective, right?
Well, I think from my perspective, it really does go back to the same basics, right? When we think about the fact that we may have access to more data than we've had historically, although obviously with GDPR and a number of things that restrictions around data and putting the power and the ownership of data back in the data owner's hands, right, in the consumer's hands. Obviously, that's critical, and we all need to be on board with doing that. And so, but that aside, I think where the consumer gets anxious, just like you mentioned, you got anxious from a B2B standpoint, is how is that data being used, the data that's being gleaned from me and my behavior. How is that data ultimately being used? And if I, as a consumer, don't like the way that data is being used, then I want to have access to be able to turn that off, if you will, right? And we need to make that available to the consumer because it's critical for having a relationship with them, having a trusted relationship with them, because people want to have trust in a brand regardless of how they're engaging with them. So it's critical. So as a marketer, it really still comes back to, just because I may know these things about a consumer, I still have to be thoughtful about how I'm going to target them and be thoughtful about the way I'm going to target them. So all of the basic requirements around test and learn, all of that is still in play. Now, maybe it's on, I'll go back to saying it's on steroids, and maybe we're able to run those test cycles and AI can help us determine the right campaigns to send. But at the end of the day, it's going to come back to looking at the analytics and determining, what have we gained in leveraging AI to run these models and run these campaigns and targeting? And that's where you've got to have all of the listening capability on to understand, did we, like in your particular case, did we in some way alienate this consumer by the way we use their data and the way that we targeted them?
Yeah.
So just because we may have gotten a very recent signals are incredibly important, right? Everyone's trying to figure out how to use digital signals to drive, the next touch. Again, just because you may have access to that signaling, you still have to be thoughtful about the way you use it, because the consumer is only going to be able to digest so much, and they're going to have sensitivities around where and when you're contacting them. So all of that's just still in play. I don't think any of that goes away. It's just that we're able to run those cycles so much more frequently and at a greater intensity by utilizing AI than we may have in the past. We can certainly do things with in a much tighter recency because of our access to the data. But I still think it's incredibly important that we are looking at the outcomes of how we're using that data in the reactions that we're getting from the consumer. And that may be an actual transaction in terms of buying, but it may also be in terms of how they're coming back and maybe sending messages to us digitally in terms of how they're responding. So all of that, the knowing if somebody emailed in because they were not happy about something, right? Are you pulling all of that information into that contextual data layer because you've been able to stitch together who that individual is and all of the interactions they're having with the brand, wherever that may be happening. So as a marketer, again, we've got access to amazing amounts of data, but I think we still have to be incredibly thoughtful about how we use it to drive that experience with the consumer and be listening when the consumer's reacting, whether it's good or bad.
Yeah, really good, great insights. Thank you. And one thing I want to add to that is that we've got to put ourselves in the shoe of our consumers, right? Like,
always.
Do we want to
always
be treated this way, right? Like, do we want to get a hyper personalized email or ad 7 a.m. when I'm drinking my coffee and going through my phone, you know? And the word I was looking for was creepy factor. When I said scary earlier, that's like actually a real term right now, like with AI, hyper personalization. And another keyword that I had noted was algorithm burnout, which you actually mentioned too, is that because we have access to such a deep level of personalization at the speed that we're doing right now, people are getting burned out, and it just there's this whole AI burnout thing that's just happening because of overconsumption of AI, which brings up the whole higher level concept of AI governance. We actually are working with a client right now, and not so much at the data level, but as the adoption level. Like, what are some of the do's and not do's to using AI? We don't, like, for example, we don't use AI to write your blog post from scratch. You give it a brief, you do a rough draft, you give it to your ChatGPT or Gemini, whatever that you like. Then it will we'll give you the finalized version of it. Then you still read it, polish it, humanize it, So there's, that's a very simple, super simple example of AI governance. So that's the route that I think we need to go as marketers, to have some sort of AI governance in place in order to avoid some of the things you mentioned, the creepy factor,
Yeah.
And that also includes data. We don't want to certain things, if I go to a healthcare provider, like let's say I go to my dentist and I give him my social security, the last thing I need is somebody kind of like contact me and says, let's just assume I have less than perfect credit, or have bad credit, we give you medical loan or something like that. I'm just thinking of an example on the fly right now. That would really freak me out. And another example I can think of that happened to me in real life is that a few months ago, a couple of client invoices were late. You know how it is with clients. Sometimes they don't like to pay on time, and I had to pay my team. So I took a one-time advance credit, advanced cash from my credit card. And ever since, my text is going off with all these lenders want to give me like $300,000 for business. And I'm like, whoa, my bank, and I'm going to tell you who they are, Wells Fargo, because they're known to do stuff like this, sold my data. Somehow,
really?
somehow, or maybe the credit card company, because
got the signal.
Because maybe when I took cash advance, I had to report it to Experian. So sorry, Wells Fargo, maybe it wasn't you, but because I had to get reported to credit bureaus, now I'm getting all these like offers. I'm like, it was a one-time thing. I needed to pay my team, and it was just at the beginning it was so, it's like, hey, don't take, one of them said that don't take cash advances, get business line credit. I was like, whoa, this is crazy,
Pretty specific. Yeah, pretty specific.
It was very specific. So, and that's something that we have to be very careful. And in healthcare, I have known companies, because we work with a couple of healthcare companies right now, I've known companies that have had to face lawsuits, and
I'm sure. Yeah.
And
I'm sure.
And right now, they basically, one of our clients has completely turned off ChatGPT from the workplace. When you're working in a clinic, you cannot go ChatGPT or any of these Gemini. Now we're trying to, or any of these LLMs, we're trying to work with them to kind of open it up, but have some sort of AI governance in place as well. So, because we don't want them to lose the opportunity of using AI for day to day. So these are all like connected, right? And all goes back to data. And what you feed to the LLMs is essentially becoming into a data. So you have to have some sort of data governance in place. You know where the data is being stored, where is it going, how is it being utilized, and that's all part of the data governance, correct?
Yeah, for sure. I think the important thing to remember too is that for the most part, the consumers, I just think consumers today are a bit more savvy. I would hope are a bit more savvy with the fact that their data is being utilized for targeting purposes, and so I think there's an expectation then too that with that knowledge of the fact that my data is being utilized, there is an expectation that the brand, if you will, is going to use that data appropriately, right? And when they don't use it appropriately, obviously, I'm not going to be happy about it. So I deeply encourage brands to think about, yes, you can use AI to do amazing things, but there should also be the conversation around just literally, how are we going to use AI? What are the best ways for us to utilize AI? Beyond, we're going to use AI to go and do X, Y, Z, to manage campaigns, et cetera. Yeah, that's cool, you can do that. But there should be an enterprise level conversation happening about how a company itself is going to utilize AI. And that is where there can be challenges because you're going to have, well, you probably run into this with clients, right? You may have a marketing team that's on the sort of the cutting edge of trying to use AI, and they're going to move quick, which a lot of brands want their marketing people to move quickly on executing and utilizing AI. Well, there's all the operational aspects too, right? So now we're using AI in the marketing channel, but have we siloed how that's being used at an enterprise level? And shouldn't we be having a larger conversation about how it's going to be used across the entire enterprise? So from a governance standpoint, on the AI piece, again, because if we are pulling all of these different data that we can know about any one consumer, we should be thinking about how AI is impacting the entire enterprise, not just, the marketing team.
That's really great because that's such a good tip because I'm so stuck in my world of sales and marketing and just looking at a bigger picture. That's such a great advice. Thank you.
Yeah. Especially when you think about the fact that, and you may not think of it as operational, but all of the order data and how that order was taken from the consumer, shipped to them, right? All that sits in your operational data. But again, if you're doing the work to stitch all that together so you can completely understand everything about Rick, and you start to utilize all of the touch points, whether they be marketing engagement or operational elements of my order history, if you will, I should at an enterprise level have an understanding of how we're going to utilize the data for any one purpose, whether it be operational or marketing.
Got it. Makes perfect sense. Let's talk about data and analytics a little bit in AI. We use AI a lot. AI and analytics a lot. In the past, I had to use like third parties like Zapier or whatnot to connect my analytic platforms to, ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude. And now more of the platforms like Google Analytics is an example. They have their own little AI chatbot inside Analytics where you can ask questions. But obviously that's a very basic example. But when you go at a larger scale, when you have to look at data and analyze data, whether it's for sales, marketing, finance, AI makes a really good use case. So you can do things a lot faster. You spend less time creating pivot tables and doing all that spreadsheet work that we used to do. Yeah. So that's the advantage of it, visualization, we can create charts and graphs on the fly. But what are some of the drawbacks and what are some of the best practices in your opinion?
Right. Good question. So I'm going to go back to the critical aspect of the contextual data layer, right? Mm-hmm. So if you, depending on the company or brand that you talk to, there's a lot of emphasis on that, mainly because if you haven't defined, like say we have a certain set of metrics or a metric that we want to track on our consumers, there are certain data or certain metrics that should not be left up to different interpretation or different formulation, if you will, right? So there is an equation or a way that we may be defining how we calculate any set of performance metrics, right? Especially about a consumer. And so what you're seeing is that when we look at those metrics that are performance metrics that are being measured by the company maybe at an enterprise level, there's a real strict adherence to that being built in as part of the contextual data layer so that when various departments, if you will, are accessing the larger data to run analysis and so forth, there isn't three different ways that we're reporting response, if you will, right? Whatever that metric might be. And so it comes back to what are we going to lock down in terms of saying, these metrics and the way that we calculate these metrics, that's not up for debate, right? We have decided and we have determined that this is the way that we want to, and this is how we're calculating them. and building that into that layer so that no matter who's accessing the data, that part of the data doesn't change. Now, I may have different ways that I want to present it. I may want to run metrics and calculations off of that base data. I may want to use a different presentation layer than another department, whatever it might be. But at the end of the day, it comes back to we have defined the critical corporate, if you will, enterprise level metrics of performance a particular way, and nobody gets to mess with that. And if there is some consideration about whether those need to be changed, it's going to go through a rigorous process where that's analyzed and measured and decided on, and discussed and decided on, and then reset. But those are not things that we're messing around with every day and that we're changing up, because there's been rigor around defining what those are. And that's, critically important. Again, I don't know that that's ever not really been the case. Maybe some companies are more stringent about that than others, but there has to be this consistent understanding of how we've defined these things that nobody gets to mess with. You can go play with other things and calculate off of that, but at the end of the day, how we've defined the standards, that just needs to be strictly adhered to, if you will.
Yeah, and follow-up question on that. Does that happen at the department level or enterprise level or both?
I think it happens at both.
Yeah.
Because you do have certain metrics that are very department specific, other things that may be at the corporate level and are sort of, are consistent across business units, but individual business units may have their own metrics. But again, whatever's been defined for that department, if you will, that metric, if that metric is shared out, it's the same metrics that's shared out across the enterprise, and no one else is recalculating that or representing it in a different way, right? There's an agreement that this is how we've defined it, this is how we're going to report it, we're going to keep that consistent, right?
Yeah.
Especially when you've got, a C-suite looking at high-level reporting, everything needs to flow up and be accurate, right? There cannot have been a new way that data is flowing up for high-level strategic reporting. There's an absolute expectation that there's going to be consistency in the way that we measure. Obviously, your results will ultimately change over time, but how we measure and the way we've defined those metrics, that doesn't change. And if it does change, it goes through a very rigorous process, without a doubt.
Yeah, that's, I can think of from a marketing perspective that, we marketers tend to look at KPIs a little bit differently than, let's say, enterprise does. We look at visibility and engagement and downloads and things like that. And when you are doing your QBR reports, let's say, when you present QBR reports, they're like, okay, how much SEO brought, how much email brought? And those type of data are increasingly getting diluted. And an example right now that I'm actually dealing with right now is we have an e-commerce client that, because they have a very strict GDPR implementation on the website, I think it's called advanced mode, where basically you have to consent to cookies. You have to agree in order the cookies to be launched, or else there would be no cookies, right? You can still use their website and you can still buy stuff on their product. So when a customer comes in from SEO or paid media or whatever, it looks like the ROAS and the paid media dropped, and it looks like the SEO is converting a lot less because of the new update they made to the website. But pretty much the revenue on the bottom line is pretty much the same. It's just they're being attributed to direct or whatever. And not having that, getting the stake in this particular client is a smaller company, so it was a lot easier to explain that what's happening here, and they seem to understand it. But I can only imagine what type of complexity this will create at the larger enterprises, especially if they're comparing year-over-year data. It's like, hey, how do we go about this KPIs? How did SEO lose so much revenue? Well, because you changed the way you allow analytics to track, user engagement on a website, and that is something that oftentimes the marketers are put on the spot, and that kind of brings me up to this has to be someone at the company, chief data scientist, chief data analyst, chief data officer, to be responsible for this stuff, to evangelize for this stuff, to coordinate this stuff, because it cannot always fall on marketing, right?
No. But it's going to be different probably in every organization, depending on how those organizations have structured themselves and how they've developed over time. So it may be the ownership of of the CTO in one group, it could potentially fall under the CMO in another group. It's going to vary. But what I would say is that it still comes back to where we chatted earlier, which is this idea of, have we done the work to stitch together all the information we know about a particular consumer, a particular buyer, when we're building out the data, right? And to your point, which I think is a good one, because I know you've run into this and I've run into this multiple times, where you're looking at year-over-year reports and something just isn't making sense, and you do some digging and you realize, right, this isn't consistent because the way it got measured last year isn't the way it's being measured this year, right?
Right.
And that happens probably more times than it certainly should out there. Mm-hmm. But knowing that, and if we think about where we can go with advancing our analytics with the use of AI, we still come back to the basics of, do we totally understand how we're calculating these metrics so that when we're looking and doing comparisons, it's apples to apples, right?
Yeah.
That, again, the basics never go away. That's still critically important. And if we are going to change the way that we're doing those measurements, have we documented that, and is there visibility to that, so that when we are looking at a quarter-to-quarter, year-over-year results, we know that we have an apples-to-apples comparison, or at least we know that we've changed that measurement, and now we have a new start to our baseline where we're going to start comparing over time periods as well. So, but again, it comes back to, the basic doesn't change. There needs to be clarity and visibility to how we have calculated these various metrics.
Yeah, really great stuff. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Time flies when you're having fun. We've been speaking for over 41 minutes. So we got to wrap this up. And the way I usually do it is I like to kind of ask you a few personal questions. But before I do that, I want to ask you how users can get hold of you. Are you in social media, on LinkedIn? And, what's the best way? What are some of the services you can provide for them?
Yeah, certainly on LinkedIn is a great place to find me. You could come directly to DataRamp, to our site, and you can drop in a touch point there, a connect touch point there. But LinkedIn's probably the easiest place to find me, without a doubt, for sure.
Awesome. Cool.
Yeah. No, and I'm happy to, and I think we're in a mode too right now where, as much as we like to talk to companies about sales opportunities for us, we're also really anxious just to have conversations with synergistic technologies and potential partners just about what's happening out there. I asked a question to some folks the other day around, what do you really see as the adoption rate of AI, specifically in marketing? What do you see as the adoption rate happening in AI? And I think it varies, but I think we're also seeing that companies are taking their time to figure out how they want to lean into AI, what's the best roadmap for them to incorporate AI, how do we think about the change management in moving to utilizing more AI. So I just, encourage companies to be thoughtful about it. Let's use it for sure, but let's be super thoughtful about it and understand all of the aspects and challenges that may occur in utilizing that. And like I say, just have lots of conversations. Talk to as many people as you can and get real world experiences about what's been successful for them and what's been challenging and where they may have failed. I think it's important for us as industry people to just share that information with each other. Super important.
Amazing. Good stuff. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, usually in my podcast, we're asking 3 random personal questions. If you're ready, I'm going to ask you the first one.
Yeah, go for it.
Number 1, a very generic one. What do you like to do when you're not working?
When I'm not working, probably my biggest departure is playing music. So I play bass in a rock band, and we do all original music. In fact, last night was band night, so lots of fun. So yeah, that's probably my big departure is getting to the studio and playing music. Good stuff.
Yeah. If you ever come up with some sort of album, I'm more than happy to pay and download.
Yeah, we need to get out there. We've got a good new set of music, so we need to get out there and start gigging again.
Amazing. All right, second question.
Yeah,
I know you like to travel because I've seen you put some pictures on LinkedIn and stuff.
Yeah.
Where was your most favorite spot that you traveled to?
The most recent trip that we really had a great time. Well, we did a big family trip to Hawaii at the end of February. Love the Big Island. We had a great time there. But just prior to that, where we went was last December, and we had been there earlier last year as well, Mexico City.
It's Mexico City amazing, yeah.
Unbelievable. I had never been there before. We took the kids early last year, and then in December we went and did some dear friends of ours celebrated their 60th birthdays there, and so it was a destination birthday party. And man, love Mexico City. It's just
I love Mexico City.
so much going on there. The art, the culture, the food, people were wonderful. Yeah, love Mexico City.
Amazing, cool. And the third question. So this is kind of a little bit of a weird one, but you know,
it's all right.
if you could, be a superhero from a comic or a comic movie, what would it be? And it doesn't have to be a superhero. It could also be a
Like, what would I like my superpower to be?
superpower. Yeah, I think that's probably the better question.
My superpower. That's a good question. I think my superpower, if I could have a superpower, it's going to sound totally idealistic. The superpower of being able to allow people to communicate effectively. That would be my superpower. People that don't speak the same language, people that don't come from the same culture. How can I bring those people together in conversation to learn more about each other? That would be my idealistic superpower.
That's when you need That's when you need good data.
We got to have good data. We need to talk with each other. We need to listen to each other. That's so important. So important.
Amazing. This was great. I benefited personally from this conversation a lot, as always. I really appreciate your time. Do you have any questions? Anything you'd like to know about?
No, it was fun. Thanks for inviting me. You and I haven't chatted, this much for a while, so it was fun to do. I've been at this a while. I'd like to think I know something. I'm not the master of all time and space, but hopefully this was helpful for people that listen to it. And again, would love to continue the conversation offline for sure. No doubt about it.
Awesome. Thank you, Rick. Appreciate it. Have a good day. Have a nice weekend.
You too, Al. Take care, man.
Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.